we're taking a break from our normal series, but I encourage you to be back next week as we go back into the book of James and we continue to look at the gospel at ground zero. But we're going to be talking about how God uses people, and of course, it's Mother's Day, and so we're going to be talking about how God used moms in the Bible, and a couple of them you may never have heard of. But we're going to be talking about how God used moms as an influence, and a powerful influence, and what that could look like in all of our lives. I've been hearing a lot of the same question in my life recently. We've had quite a few opportunities to meet new people as we were at Brianna's graduation, and we met Austin's wonderful family for the first time, and his mom and dad were here, and his grandparents were here, and just again running into people at graduation and different things that Brooke and I haven't seen for a long, long time. We ran into some people that we hadn't seen since college, and so I've been getting the same question a lot recently, and probably 8 out of 10 of those people that either I met for the first time or ran into again asked me this question: where do your kids get their musical ability? Are you musical? And after I was done laughing, I said, oh, no. I said, no. They got it from their mother. They got it from their mama. And that is the truth. The musical talent of my family definitely flows through that gene pool. And I thought we would start today by taking a look at some ideas of what motherhood, because we're going to be talking about what are some things that we got from our mom? What are some things where we can look at patterns of godly women, godly moms, and see what that influence can produce in our lives? And it's amazing how we understand motherhood. And so I'm going to take a minute and we're going to look at a couple of modern day perceptions or perceived reflections, I guess I should say, of motherhood. There was a teacher that gave her class of second graders a lesson on the magnet and what it does. I mean, at second grade, magnets are kind of cool, and you need to figure out how they operate and how they work. And so the next day, she gave them a written test, and she included this question: my name has 6 letters. The first is M, and I pick things up. What am I? And when the test papers were turned in, to her amazement, almost 50% of the students answered that question with the word mother. You haven't got it yet, have you? Yeah. Starts with M, and I pick things up. A teacher asked a little boy this question. He said, suppose your mom baked a pie and there were 7 of you, your parents and 5 children. What part of the pie would you get? A 6th, the little boy replied. She said, I don't think you know your fractions yet. She said, now remember, there are 7 of you. And the little boy said, yes, there are 7, but you don't know my mom. She would say she didn't want any pie. The little boy forgot his lines in a Sunday school presentation one day, and his mother was in the front row to prompt him, and she gestured and formed the words silently with her lips, but it didn't help. The little boy was stage fright, and he was staring blankly, deer in the headlights. And finally, she leaned forward as far as she could, and she whispered the cue, I am the light of the world. The child beamed because he had the line, and with great feeling and with loud, clear voice, he said, my mom is the light of the world. One more. A 4-year-old and a 6-year-old presented their mom with a houseplant. They had saved all their allowance and used their own money to buy the plant, and mom was so thrilled. And the older one of them handed the gift to their mom and with a sad face said, Mom, there was another bouquet that we wanted to give you at the flower shop, and it was really pretty, but it was too expensive. She said, well, why did you want to get me that one? And She said, well, it had a ribbon on it. It said, rest in peace. And we thought it would be perfect since you're always asking for a little peace so that you can rest. Moms, your fingerprints are indelibly imprinted on all of our lives and etched into the fabric of our society. I believe motherhood to be a divinely ordained position in the overall kingdom and plan of God. It is not just a place in a family. It is not just a feminine characteristic. It is a part of the divinely ordained plan of God. There is something powerful in the instinct known as motherhood. When we talk about things that we got from our mama, we tend to more readily recognize the physical characteristics like eyes and noses. Sometimes, like I said earlier, we connect talents and behaviors. The musical ability or some other talent or behavior that we believe comes from that side of our family. Well, today I want to celebrate some spiritual things that we can also get from the influence of a godly mom. Now, I understand that everything that we have comes from God, but I also believe that God can use people in divine places, that God can give things through people that are willing to be vessels of influence. And so we're going to be speaking, yes, pretty much directly to moms today and thanking them for their influence and challenging them to continue in that. But all of us can realize that there is an influence, and there are influences in our lives, and we can also decide to become an influence in other people's lives. Today, if you see these influences in your mother, be thankful. Be thankful for that. If you see these in yourself, ladies, would you be worshipful? Because God has used you in that way. If you see these developing in your children, be reliable. Continue in that. And if you don't see these in others, then be plentiful. Be the one that passes them on. Let's go to the first one. I got from my mama the attitude to overcome. The attitude to overcome. Matthew chapter 15, verse 21 says, leaving that place, Jesus withdrew to the region of Tyre and Sidon, and a Canaanite woman from that vicinity came to him, crying out, Lord, Son of David. Now you got to understand the context here. She is a Canaanite woman. So there's a couple of things that are difficult in this moment already. Before we even get to the interaction, there's some things that are happening. There's some things that are in the background here that make this situation very, very difficult. But look at what she says. Lord, Son of David. She is recognizing his lordship. She's recognizing his kingship. She's recognizing the difference between her and him, and still makes that approach. Have mercy on me. My daughter is suffering terribly from demon possession. Jesus did not answer a word. Now, again, if we were to see this in a modern day context, if we were to be, walking through Walmart and see this happening and Jesus just kind of turns his back, how rude, huh? How rude could you be? Let's keep going. So his disciples came to him and urged him, send her away, for she keeps crying out after us. Number one, here's the presumptuousness of a bunch of men. She's crying out after us. No, she doesn't want anything to do with you guys. She needs Jesus in this moment. But look again at what they do. Tell her to go away. Now again, you say, why would they do that? It goes back to what we talked about at the beginning. Number one, in that culture, And I know that this rubs the modern day culture very raw, but in that culture, as a woman, she was out of place. She was out of her role. And she was Canaanite. If you go back into the Old Testament, and when God's people moved over into the land of their promise, they were battling who? Canaanites. She was an enemy of God. So again, the response here at first glance in our culture is, well, that's not the Jesus I serve, but it's actually accurate. He answered, I was sent only to the lost sheep of Israel. There you see why he's making the statements, why he didn't make a statement. The woman came and she knelt before him. Lord, help me, she said. And he replied, it is not right to take the children's bread and toss it to their dogs. Whoa, this gets worse. Yes, Lord, she said. But even the dogs eat the crumbs that fall from their master's table. And in that moment, Jesus answered her, woman, you have great faith. Your request is granted, and her daughter was healed from that very hour. There is much that we can learn from this Canaanite mom. Indeed, she was worthy to be called mother. She needed help for her demon-possessed daughter, and she refused to take no for an answer. When it came to her position as a mom, when it came to her child, when it came to the need that she was facing and the debilitation that her daughter was under, this mom said, I am going to push all in. There's nothing that's going to stop me. Culture's not going to stop me. Criticism's not going to stop me. Concerns are not going to stop me. I am going after this. Look at her obstacles. Just look at what she faced. First, this is not a typical ailment. I know that being diseased, blind, and lame are pretty weighty matters to deal with, but this woman's child is being controlled and damaged by an evil force in her life. There are no medicines, there are no remedies, there are no soothing comforts for this child. There is only one answer. Something evil controls her very actions. And so helpless, this mom travels for miles and finds a man that she has only heard of. Then she's ignored. Then she is ignored. Jesus doesn't even give her a glance. How many other people had crossed the street to avoid that woman with the out-of-control kid? You've done it. We've all done it. In the grocery store. You hear it from 3 aisles over. The screams, the begging, the pleading, and you're like, please don't let me have to go down the cereal aisle. Please don't let me have to go down the cereal aisle. How many people had, as this woman was coming into town, literally avoided her? And then she's rejected. When the disciples can no longer ignore her cries, they petition Jesus, just reject her, send her, make it go away. Say, how can it get any? Then she's refused. Then Jesus tells her, listen, ma'am, I'm sorry, this is not going to happen today. This is not going to happen. It's not the right place. It's not the right time. You are not the right candidate. Obstacles. The reality of obstacles. Incredibly difficult circumstances, unimaginably ignored, immediately rejected, inconceivably refused, adding up to insurmountable odds. And what changed those obstacles? A mother's determination. A mom's heart. A mom who responds with, I'm still here and I'm not going anywhere. I'm still here and I'm not going anywhere. I'll take whatever you have whenever you're ready to give it, God. I'll take whatever you want to give, but I'm not going away. What impact could be made if every child of God would resist discouragement as this mother and ask and keep on asking until the righteous desires of our hearts were granted? What kind of impact would this kind of influence, if we were to take on this kind of attitude and say, you know what, God, there are things in my life that are happening. There are things in my world that are happening. There are things in my family that are happening, and there is no quick fix. There is no pill. There is nothing that's going to just make this go away. God, I have got to stand here and stay here and wait for whatever you're going to do. What would happen if that kind of influence, the kind of influence that this mom portrayed, the very desires of our hearts? Mom, there is no obstacle that you cannot manage today. Moms, there is no obstacle that you cannot get past. Your DNA is wired with a determination. So hang in there and always approach God with an unaltered attitude of spiritual obstinance. I'm still here. I'm still here on behalf of my kids. I'm still here on behalf of my family. I'm still here on behalf of this situation. I'm still here on behalf of my finances. I'm still here, God. And whatever it is, if it's a crumb, I'll take it. Because it's from your table. Because it's from your table. Don't quit too early. Don't walk away saying, I'm not getting what I want. Take what God is doing, because God said, I have seen the faith of this woman. And from that point on, her daughter was fine. Second thing I got from my mama, it's the inspiration of integrity. The inspiration of integrity. By all human standards, Moses never had a chance. I mean, when you look at how this kid's life started, he never had a chance. Not only was he born to a slave, but there was already a death sentence upon his life the moment he was born. He had been born, had he been born a girl, he would have been allowed to live. But as a boy, he had no life expectancy due to the paranoia of power and the sinister plan of Satan. Moses was a Hebrew, born in the cruel culture of ancient Egypt, where Pharaoh had declared that all Hebrew boys that were born were to be exterminated, that they were to be thrown into the river, to the crocodiles, by the way. So not only did they have to die, it was pretty gruesome the way that it was going to happen. And into this situation, Moses was born. He was born to a slave. He was born out of influence of Egypt. He was born with a death sentence. All of these things take place. One roadblock stymied Pharaoh's plan. There was one thing that got in the way of what Pharaoh was trying to do. It wasn't a government legislation. It wasn't a bill. It wasn't any of these kinds of things that was going to put a stop to this incredible death sentence. It was a young, determined mom named Jochebed. While everyone bowed to this new order, one person would not submit. While everyone gave in to the decree, Jochebed made a different and difficult decision. No one, not even mighty Pharaoh, would be able to lay his hands on this God-given child. Her courage saved a nation because Moses was her child, the great deliverer of Israel. Only eternity will show the greatness of what this mom accomplished. Moses was her third child. Her firstborn was Aaron. He later became the high priest, and from his family would come all of the line of the priests. Her second child was Miriam, and she looked after Moses. She too used her instinct to protect and provide for her family. She is intimately associated with her brothers in Israel's history because she was a gifted poet. She was a gifted musician. Has any mother in history ever raised three more noteworthy children? Aaron, the line of priesthood. Miriam, poet and musician. Moses, deliverer of a nation. And remember, she raised all of them in slavery. She determined in her heart to stand firm against the forces of evil in her world, forces that wanted to destroy her son, forces that wanted to destroy her nation, forces that wanted to come against her own God. Not only was Moses' life saved, but the Egyptian government actually paid Jochebed to nurse and influence her own child. So not only is she doing something great for God, but she's actually taking the resource of the enemy to make it happen. Now that's pretty impressive. When it came time, Pharaoh's daughter raised Moses as her own son. She gave him her name, his education, and all the wealth and grandeur of ancient Egypt. And even though Jochebed had custody of her own son for only a few years, she apparently had instructed him so thoroughly with the truth of God and the plight of the Hebrew people that Moses, who most of the world would consider to be the son of Pharaoh, ultimately forsook every earthly privilege to serve God and to take care of his people. How does that happen? How do you walk away from being the son of the Pharaoh, the rightful heir, a rightful heir, to one of the greatest empires the world has ever known? We, to this day, celebrate that particular empire. The pyramids, all of the things that went on came out of that empire, that time frame. And yet here's a son that says, you know what? My mama taught me something else. There's an influence in my life that is bigger than anything the world has. I like the way the author of Hebrews speaks about Jochebed. She was not afraid, it says, of the king's edict. By faith, Moses' parents hid him for 3 months after he was born because they saw he was no ordinary child, and they were not afraid of the king's edict. They were not afraid of what the world was demanding on them, and they caved. They were not afraid to stand up and said, this child, this family, this situation belongs to God, and we are going to operate in that standard. And because of that, God actually allowed the resources of the world to become theirs as she raised her son in a godly manner while the enemy paid the bill. By faith, Moses, when he had grown up, refused to be known as the son of Pharaoh's daughter. He chose to be mistreated along with the people of God rather than to enjoy the pleasures of sin for a short time. See, because of this influence, Moses was not willing to put aside the spiritual base that was built in him by his real mom. See, there is an influence that we can bring to our children. There is an influence that we can bring to our children. That is a standard that God will raise them up so that when they do get old, they are going to make decisions that go far beyond. Far beyond. Years later, Paul wrote to Timothy these words in 2 Timothy, I've been reminded of your sincere faith, which first lived in your grandmother Lois and in your mother Eunice. And I am persuaded now lives in you also. What is Paul saying? I see an influence in you, Timothy. I see an influence in your life. I see something that is driving you, that is going to help you make decisions that are far beyond the ones that the world says to make. Where did it come from? It came from godly women. Well, that was a good spot right there. Men, let me challenge you though. Now, Timothy's father is Greek, and that's why Paul doesn't address him. We don't know much about Timothy's father because he's Greek. We don't know what his influence may have been, so I'm not going to speak about his dad. But let me challenge you, do not let grandmas and moms be the only influence in your kids' lives. For this reason, he says. For this reason. What reason? The reason that Timothy was living under a powerful godly influence that women of God put into his life. For this reason, I remind you to fan into flame the gift of God. My friend, if you have a praying grandma, if you have a praying mom, if you have someone who is invested in your life and has spoken truth into your life, you have a responsibility. You have an obligation to that, not to let that die, not to let that go away, not to forget that that's where you came from. He tells Timothy, you need to fan that into a flame. You need to take that influence that was given to you, those words that were spoken into you by a parent, those words that were spoken into you by a Sunday school teacher, and you need to begin to fan those things into a flame so that you're burning bright, so that your week is different than anybody else's week in your office or on your campus. That influence was godly placed in your life for a reason. Don't forget it, but don't just sit on it. Church, we got to fan that into a flame. There is something to be said about heritage. There is something to be said about the shoulders of giants that we stand upon today. Because of them, you are here today because there has been someone somewhere in your life. I believe this. There has been someone somewhere in your life. You may not even know who they are, who prayed for you, who spoke to God about you, who lifted you up. It may have been one time, but it brought you here today. And you have a responsibility. You have a responsibility not to forget that. You have a responsibility to do something with that. Don't let those prayers, don't let those tears, don't let those concerns fade away. Fan that into a flame. It's not even in my notes. Where am I? Which is in you through the laying on of my hands. For God did not give us a spirit of timidity. I love the connection here. I love the connection here. We take this verse so many times, we pluck it out, and it's just one of those standalones. Look at it in context. It's powerful. It's powerful. Look at it in context. Hey, Timothy, you have godly influences in your life. Your grandmother, your mom, they raised you, they prayed for you, they brought you up. So Timothy, you need to fan that into a flame. You need to get some kind of energy. You need to get some kind of heat flowing from what God has blessed in your life. Why? Because God did not give you a spirit of timidity. In other words, and hear this, church, if you're not fanning those influences into a flame, you're setting back on your laurels. You're setting back on your blessed assurance. He says it's time. You weren't given a spirit of timidity. You weren't given that spirit either by God or by the influences of your life. Those people prayed for you. Those people invested in you. Those people spoke life into you so that you would do something powerful. On this Mother's Day, may I suggest to you Not only is this a heritage that you should take responsibility for to fan in your own life, but that this is a heritage that you owe your children and your family. This is a heritage that you owe your children and your family. Never underestimate the power that God has given you, moms. Never underestimate that power. Never shrink from your responsibility in letting God shine through your life into the hearts of your children and your husband. Say, Ken, you don't know my situation. You don't know how difficult my life has been. You don't know how difficult my marriage is. You don't know how bad that person is to me. That's true, I don't know. I don't know all the details of all your life. But I do know Jochebed's situation. And unless you're living in slavery, your children are under a death sentence, and you are penniless without any hope for the future, you're not as bad off as she was. And she took on the responsibility of integrity in her son's life. Moms, nurse and nurture your family in the nature of the kingdom. Nurse and nurture your family in the nature of the kingdom. Produce in them the determination to pursue God's purpose for their lives. Inspire them, in them, the integrity of a godly life. Give your children every opportunity to learn about godly living and following God's design for their life. Get them involved in church and let them see you involved in church. If you want faithful kids, you have to be faithful parents. Because here's what's going to happen. The same thing that happened to Moses. One day the world is going to come to raise your kids. The world is going to come to raise your children as their own. Just like in Egypt, there is a mandate by the ruler of this world. He does not want godly children raising up to becoming godly adults. His desire is to drown them out, to feed them to the devastations of this world. He wants to put them under his influence and raise them as his own. It is happening at the youngest of ages right now. And somewhere there have got to be some Jochebeds that stand up and say, I will not allow this to happen. One day, the world will come to raise your child as its own. Constantly use your touch. Constantly use your touch to inspire integrity in their lives. Last thing. I got from my mama the sacrifices for security. Irma Bombeck, many, many years ago, as a journalist, she wrote this. She said, for the first 4 or 5 years after I had children, I considered motherhood a temporary condition, not a calling. It was a time of my life set aside for exhaustion and long hours. But this, too, would pass. Then one afternoon, with 3 kids in tow, I came out of a supermarket pushing a cart with 4 wheels that went in opposite directions, when my toddler son got away from me. Just outside the door, he ran towards a machine holding brightly colored circles in a glass dome. In a voice that shattered the sound barrier, he shouted, "Gimme, gimme!" I told him that I would give him what for if he didn't stop shouting and get in the car. As I physically tried to pry his body from around the bubblegum machine, he pulled the entire thing over. and glass and balls of bubble gum went all over the parking lot. Instantly, we had a sizable crowd. She said, I leaned in and I whispered to him, "You will never see a cartoon as long as you live if you do not control your temper. And you are going to be making license plates for a living." He tried to stifle his little sobs as he looked around at the crowd of adults. She said, then he did something that I was to remember for the rest of my life. In his helpless quest for comfort, he turned to the only one he trusted with his emotions with, and that was me. He threw his arms around my knees, hid his face behind my legs, and held on for dear life. She said the realization that I had humiliated him, I had chastised him and berated him, but I was still all he had. That single incident defined my role. I was a major force in this child's life. Sometimes we forget how important stability is to a child. She said, I've always told mine, the easiest part of being a mother is giving birth. The hardest part is showing up every other day. You know, Mother's Day is traditionally a day when children give something back to their moms for all of the spit they use to wash and dry our faces with, all the old gum that they held in their hands, all the noses that they wiped, all the bloody knees that they made well with a kiss. It's Appreciation Day for making your children finish something that they said they couldn't do, not believing them when they said, I hate you, and sharing their good times and their bad times. The cards that you receive today, ladies, probably won't reflect it, but what we are trying to say is, thank you for showing up. Thank you for just showing up. There's one last mom I want to introduce you to today, and it's a mom that simply showed up. 2 Samuel 21. But the king took Armoni and Mephibosheth, the two sons of Ai's daughter Rizpah, whom she had borne to Saul, together with the 5 sons of Saul's daughter Merab. She handed them over to the Gibeonites, who killed them and exposed them on a hill before the Lord. Rizpah, daughter of Ai, took sackcloth and she spread it out for herself on a rock. From the beginning of the harvest till the rain poured down from the heavens on the bodies, she did not let the birds of the air touch them by day or wild animals by night. When David was told what Rizpah, Saul's concubine, had done, he went and took the bones of Saul and his son Jonathan from the citizens of Jabesh Gilead. David brought the bones of Saul and his son Jonathan from there, and the bones of those who had been killed and exposed were gathered up. And they buried the bones in the tomb of Saul's father Kish and did everything the king commanded. After that, God answered prayer on behalf of the land. For 6 months. Anybody ever know of a lady by the name of Rizpah? She's not in the top 25 of biblical lists. She's secluded back in the historic passages of Kings. But here she is. For 6 months. For 6 months. She sat in the shadow of her dead, decaying sons and protected them. This devoted mother each day with the sun shining and the heat rising fought off the birds that came to feed off the bodies of her boys. And at nighttime was a time for rest from only the heat and sun, Because every night for 6 months, this devoted mom fought off wild animals, jackals, hyenas, animals of prey that came to devour the bodies of her children. She was protecting them, protecting her sons from further disgrace and further humiliation. There wasn't much she could do for them now, but she did what she could. Rizpah protected her sons. See, her sons were executed as criminals. The father of these boys, as she was the concubine of Saul, was in disgrace already. He wasn't even buried in the place of his own family. There was so much disgrace and humiliation going on in the midst of this family. But still, this mom said, I will protect. I will sacrifice for the security of the people in my life. Even though they were criminals, she loved them. She loved them unconditionally, and that's a mother's love. It should be unconditional. That they may not approve of what their children are doing, but their love is always there. Much like the way that God loved the world, the way that God loves us, and sent his son to die for us when we were still sinners. God does not approve of our sin, but he loves us. And he's given us a way to deal with our sin if we will allow that. And that kind of love caused this mom to protect the things in her life, to protect what God had given her at such a rate, at such a fashion, that she was not even willing to bring any comfort into her own life. She didn't go find the soft spot on the ground. She didn't go find a tree to nestle up under where the grass was nice and green. She went out and she found the biggest rock she could find, and she laid down sackcloth. Imagine laying on potato sacks for 6 months. She found the itchiest, nastiest material she could find and put it down on the hardest place she could find. And she stayed there in the heat of the sun and in the cool of the night. And she fought off birds of prey and animals of devastation to protect her family, even after they had died. Do our children need protected like that today? Are there dangers in the day that seek to harm our kids? Are there terrors in the night that seek to devour them? Friends, whether you want to believe it or not, children of this world are at risk. Your kids are at risk. Now, I know for some of you that brings panic into your life. I've talked to some of you, and you see things on the news, and this is not to create fear in you. This is to create this responsibility that says, you know what, I have an influence. I have an influence. I get it. I get it that these resources, these wonderful blessings that God brings into our family as children, I don't have to fear what the enemy's going to do. I just have to be an influence in what God wants to do. Whether you want to accept it or not, and listen, I'm afraid that some of us have surrendered to the plan of the enemy. Now that's a harsh statement, I understand. But I believe that some of us have surrendered, and I believe that even in the church as a whole, in the Western church, we have surrendered our kids to culture. This is going to get really quiet. But there is a war being fought for the generations of our kids. There is a war being fought for the young people of God. The enemy is coming with everything that he has. Listen, mom, dad, you can hide your head in the sand and ignore it. You can pretend that things aren't that bad. You can say everybody else is doing it. All of that. You can disregard the fact that teen suicide is the #1 killer of teens, that over 1 million girls get pregnant each year, that teen sexuality has increased over 400% in recent years, that internet solicitation is on the rise. Predators no longer lurk in the back alleys of our urban areas. They are entering your home through devices as small as this. Deception, enticements are luring our kids into fantasy worlds that are filled with lies, lust, and loss of innocence. Christian kids are getting less and less godly all the time. There was a time in Israel's history where it said, and there was a generation that came up who knew not God nor the things of God. Can I tell you, we are approaching that same verse today. There is a generation of American kids in churches who know not God nor the true things of God. There are kids that don't even know who Jesus is anymore. Ask your kids. Have them tell you what Jesus really means to them. You may be shocked. You say, well, Pastor, that's your fault. That's the church's fault. That's why we come to church, so that our kids learn about Jesus. You give your children Jesus by modeling Christ in your home. You give your children Jesus by constantly making them aware of the presence of Christ. And I understand it will take sacrifice. It will take sacrifice. There's some hard choices that have to be made. There are going to be some loud discussions. There are going to be some, why don't you love me like everybody else's mom and dad love me? Do you think it was pleasant for Rizpah to sit on that hill for 6 months? Do you think she enjoyed watching her son's bodies decay and rot right before her eyes? Do you think that the smell and the odors of that hill were pleasant? Do you think her arms ever grew weary trying to fight off the birds? Do you think she ever dreamed of a day where this whole ordeal would just be over? Rizpah sacrificed for her children. See, that's an influence that we as a church need to make and not give in to culture. You say, I want my kids to be normal. Then maybe you don't understand. Life in Christ is not normal. There's nothing normal about it. It was never meant to be normal. It was never meant to be normal, according to culture. So if we say, I just want my kids to be normal, I want my kids to fit in school, that's not what we're called to. And it will take sacrifice. Now listen, I'm not talking about going off the grid and, not wearing buttons on your clothes. I'm not talking about, but I'm talking about being an influence that protects at all cost. I'm not talking about chaining them to the garage door so they never leave your presence. If some of you are doing that, stop. That's illegal, by the way, okay? Just want to throw that out there. I can see it now. I'm going to get a call from a cop one day going, Pastor, we need you to come down. They said you told them they could do this. I'm not talking about sticking your head in the sand the other way either. I'm talking about raising up children in the presence and the power of Christ. This sacrifice, we need to understand that being a parent is a position of leadership, and parents are not to be the kind of leader who takes a poll to see which way the wind is blowing before you make a decision. A lot of things we do may not be popular with our kids, but we need to do what's best for our kids and what's right in God's eyes. Our kids may kick, scream, and rant. So be it. We are the parents, we are the leaders, we are in charge of the home, we run the show, not them. And don't forget that kids, regardless of what they may think, at times are not equipped to make the right choices. See, there is so much confusing data swirling around their heads. And God, you know what God's command is? You help them sift through that. Moms, dads, grandmas, grandpas, because some of you as grandmas and grandpas, you have more influence than mom and dad does right now. God commands us to help them. Are you willing to sacrifice your counterfeit harmony, a truce, a peace treaty with no real issues resolved? If you are living to be unwilling to stir things up, are you willing to sacrifice that by doing what is right? Are you willing to battle through the rough waters of true parenting in order to achieve real harmony? Or are we going to settle for imitation peace and temporary ceasefires? Moms, you are equipped to unconditionally sacrifice for the security and well-being of your family. I'm going to ask the team to come. Each one of these ladies that we've discovered today were rewarded. That's the cool thing about this. They were rewarded. Each one of them was rewarded. Rewarded with answers from God. They were rewarded with amazing heritage. A heritage that changed the course of a nation as God used her influence to inspire integrity in a pastor, in a politician, and in a poet. All because she stood for what she believed. Rewarded with the restoration of her family and their honor. Mom, your efforts as a godly mom will be rewarded. And so today, as we move into just a final couple of moments of worship, I want to applaud you, moms. I want to thank you for taking seriously the idea of making a spiritual impact in the lives of your family. I know that for some of you, there have been times that you didn't think what you did mattered. I know that there are those of you in this room that you're wore out. You're tired. It's not an easy thing. But the impact that you can make because of how God has designed you, when God designed a helpmate suitable, it's this influence that God was talking about there. And so today, I applaud you. In a minute, we will all applaud you. But I want you to take a minute and realize that that comes from God. And that if you'll take just these last couple of minutes and say, God, thank you, God, for giving me the opportunity to influence my world. All of us need to do that. So will you stand with me today? Can you just say, God, I'm thankful. Maybe you're here today and you are that person that you can say, God, I'm thankful for a mom's influence in my life. Maybe you're here today and you can say, God, I'm thankful that you can make me an influence in my world. God, can you just take these next couple of moments as we worship and just say, God, I am so thankful that you give things to me. Some of it maybe came through my mom, maybe it came through my aunt, or maybe it came through a grandma. But God, you have blessed my life today. Proverbs 31:28 says, her children arise and call her blessed. Proverbs 31:30 says, a woman who fears the Lord is to be praised. And we're gonna do that in the final moments of today. But I want you to praise God for people of influence. I want you to praise God for influence as a whole. For just a couple of moments, we're gonna come back, we're gonna pray for our moms, because this is not an easy task. But can you just worship God for the influences that He's placed in your life? Come on, let's go.